African universities have long been hubs of creativity and problem solving, with researchers and students tackling some of the most pressing issues facing the continent. From developing affordable technologies to designing sustainable urban planning solutions, the innovative spirit of African academia is undeniable. This is why the upcoming meeting of the Forum for Innovation in African Universities is bringing together thought leaders, educators, and students from across the continent for exchange of ideas. One of the key objectives of this forum is to facilitate meaningful connections and collaborations between universities, industry, players, partners, and other stakeholders. Well, let's get talking. I have two gentlemen joining me from our Abuja studios again. Founder and convener of the Forum for Innovation in African Universities, Professor Pascal Anosike, and co-founder Forum for Innovation in African Universities, Mr. Klaus Schneider. Good afternoon, gentlemen. Thank you so much for being with us on Business Nigeria. We appreciate this.
Thank you. Thank you for having me.
Thank you. Good afternoon. Nice.
Yes, and I must say, Klaus, I like your attire. So you look really Nigerian, should I put it that way? But let me start with Prof. Prof, as the founder and convener of the Forum for Innovation in African University, let me start with what inspired you to establish this platform? And maybe say, what are your key objectives?
Thank you so much. It's very good to be here. I mean, my view is we have a fundamentally flawed tech architecture across the world, but more so in Africa and also particularly Nigeria, as probably not just the largest economy, but also the most populous. So Nigeria is critical in terms of how all the regions view Africa's development in the years to come. But if you look particularly within the higher education sector, if you look, if you go back to what happened during COVID, across the world, in Europe, say I put it around probably 80 to 90% of higher education institutions were able to migrate their delivery online. In North America, it was around probably 90 to 95%. In Asia, it was around 65 to 68%. But in Africa, it was about 23% of higher education providers were able to sustain their delivery. It tells us a lot. And within that higher education sector, it was mainly the private providers. So if you look at public sector institutions and also state institutions for places like Nigeria, more than 90%, in some cases, 95%, could not do anything. Students were simply sitting at home. In other words, scaling back what I call more than a decade development that we have done in terms of how we target the United Nations SDG goals around not just education, which is target 4, but also in tandem with that, target 8, which talks about obviously looking at around issues around economic potentials that actually come out from having access to higher education. So this is really crucial. It's a case of how does Africa, and obviously Nigeria being at the forefront of that, use technology to digitalize not just their curricula, but more importantly, the delivery. And if you look at the generations, not just before us, if you look at millennials, but also looking at Gen Zs, and even the digital natives before them, everything they do is around technology. If you look at the closest equipment, the closest item to any human being across the world, but more so in Africa, is their mobile phone. That is what they interact with. So it will be, in my view, counterintuitive or counterproductive if higher education sector are not really keen into all of these opportunities around technology. So this is something really the forum is fundamentally committed and dedicated to. And we're working with key partners, not just in Nigeria, but also across other African countries, to really see how can we support the higher education sector to not only embrace it, but also begin to access the resources that can enable them to use technology to really to embed it across what they're actually doing. So we're having conversations. So the essence of the forum is not just to instigate or, if you like, drive debate across this particular area. This is the only academic industry partnership network in Africa that is forensically, that is solely devoted to higher education, working with stakeholders like the National Universities Commission, like the National Commission for Colleges of Education, like the National Board for Technical Education, and also some industry partners. So these are our key partners that are really driving that debate. And the essence of this year's debate is not just in terms of how do we use technology, but also how do we look at resourcing, alternative resourcing financing. How do we look at issues around entrepreneurship? How do we look at issues around, if you like, policy? How can we make higher education, but also digitalize higher education at the center of policy? So my hope is that with this, we can begin to really key into some of the so-called presidential deliverables that the president of Nigeria, Bola Tinubu, has actually itemized, around 8 of them, which has again been used as basis to anchor what all the ministries are doing. And if you look at the Ministry of Education, for instance, they have used that, the so-called 8 presidential, if you like, priorities, to anchor what they are calling the 2024 to 2027, if you like, strategic goals. And at the heart of that is ICT. So I like what Professor Maman Taher, I think he is he's the Honorable Minister of Education. He has seen the importance of that. And these are areas which perhaps we'll be discussing on Wednesday. So I would encourage anyone, everyone, particularly those who are interested in higher education, but also seeing higher education as a key to really helping Nigeria move from A to B, not just in terms of socioeconomic development, human capital development, all of that. We cannot talk about economic development without really focusing on the social, but also the political imperatives that really can galvanize that. So I'm hoping that when we come together on Wednesday, we'll be focusing on these issues, but also bringing our partners to support local, if you like, stakeholders here to be able to key into what I call the global resources. And at the end of that, there will be a white paper that I believe that universities here, polytechnics, colleges of education, can look at as a mind map in terms of how they drive their future agenda. So I am urging everyone to go online, www.fiau.org, and register and be part of that change. Contribute to it and see where we go from here.
Well, interesting. Prof has shown us a lot of knowledge in entrepreneurship, innovations, of course, at UK and Nigerian universities. We weren't expecting anything less. Prof, thanks for that insight into all of this. But let me talk to Klaus now and ask him this question. I see also his knowledge. He has consulted for thousands of companies from entrepreneurship story up to publicly listed multinationals and all of that. And that's quite interesting. Klaus, let me ask you that what do you think are some of the challenges facing African universities now in terms of fostering a culture of innovation and entrepreneurship?
I think it's not just a African or Nigerian problem. The problem is globally. Obviously, I'm not a Nigerian, but I've made 2 degrees, international degrees, one in Germany, one in the UK. The problem is everywhere the same. In the higher education sector and in the universities, they deliver a theoretical knowledge which does not necessarily fit to the needs of the industry. This is something we try this gap we try to close, to encourage the universities to bring up or to use modern technologies. They have a lot of, especially Africa, with this big number of young population. They have such a big capacity and potential to focus on on innovation and research and development, this is traditionally done by the higher education sector. So we, with our network and with our initiative, we try to help them to get their innovations ready to market, because this is also a big opportunity, in my opinion, as a businessman, to raise money, to get funding, which is one of the major problems for a lot of institutions in the higher education sector across Africa. It's always about money and about funding research and development, but they have the potential, and especially the young people, they have to be encouraged using what they like, what they are used to, especially if you look at nowadays industry. Everyone is talking about digitalization, about AI, about new technologies. And I think, especially in Africa, there's a very, very big opportunity and potential to raise these capacities, to step into this area, which will create jobs, will create, and also the boundaries to enter the market. They are quite low. So the only thing they need is their brains, is some structure, is a good idea, and they can move something. And with the right network and the right guidance, they can bring it to market, and this will, in my understanding, and I strongly believe this will be a change for the whole of Africa.
Before I go back to Prof, let me follow up and ask you that I suppose there are some promising innovations currently developed across African universities that have the potential to drive sustainable development across the continent. But my question really is, how can the Forum for Innovation in African Universities help to amplify the voices and ideas of these young innovators? Did you get me, Prof? Did you get that question, Klaus?
Yeah, yes, I think this is, may I comment? I think this is, I mean, you talk about amplification, and I think you had Klaus also mentioned, obviously, that this is something that universities perhaps should be also encouraged to do. And before I take your question, which is how do we really encourage young people? Within the forum, for the first time, we've introduced exhibitions. So there's an exhibition angle to it. So what we're looking for is where universities can come together, but also industry can come together to showcase what they are doing, what works. I don't believe for a fact that the innovation we see in other parts of the world are any better than the innovation we see here, because innovation is obviously context specific. Innovation is only relevant to the extent to which it can solve context-specific problems. So if you look within universities, and I could probably point to one or two in terms of what they are doing. So if you go back to the point I made in terms of COVID, I like what Covenant University is doing. I can comment on that because I've worked extensively with them, not just under the previous Vice Chancellor, Professor Tairo, but also the current one. So if you look at their innovation hub, which they call Hebron Startup Hubs, okay? So I did a project with them with the British Council. It's a very good example of what I would like to see other African countries actually do, not just in Nigeria. This is also the case with University of Cape Town, where I've also supported what they are doing within the solution space. Basically, the programs that they are taught in class around entrepreneurship is mainly theoretical, okay? But if you then look at these labs, this is where students who are really doing well theoretically in terms of their ideation potentials, where they bring in their ideas to those labs, and they'll be able to access what I call business support services. So you help them from ideation, walk them through the entrepreneurial process, they understand the importance of business planning, they understand the importance of pitching their ideas, but also they understand crucially the importance of sustainability. How can they sustain that? So you move them from ideation to market. Give them all the nutritional values that they need within that ecosystem. Say for a case of 2 to 3 years, in my view, they would have been matured to go to market and recruit others So it becomes a system that really pays for itself. Universities don't have to then, or higher education institutions, don't have to entirely rely on public sector funding. They can actually then become entrepreneurial in their thinking. And all these students graduating through the innovation labs or through the so-called entrepreneurship centers. If you look, for instance, what they did, what they are doing with SEED, the Center for Enterprise and Entrepreneurial Development at the University of Maiduguri, where we've also supported them. You find out that these students are hungry for ideas, young people. We don't lack the energy or the intelligence, our young people, or even enthusiasm. All they need is the support infrastructure to be able to do that. So that in that way, universities then become not just centers of, if you like, knowledge creation. They actually become centers or avenues through which we can actually catalyze the economic potentials of the country through supporting individuals. So this is a model that has been proven to work. This is a model that can continue to work. We cannot simply sit back and pretend that our economy can grow simply by relying on what government can do. I think there are certain things different sectors can actually do. So if you look at higher education, if you look at the examples that I have actually outlined, so if young people are supported in that way, so that universities, colleges of education, technical education actually pays for itself through vocationalizing skills, through emphasizing skills, what you can actually do. So you create jobs for people. Government cannot create jobs. I mean, if you look at our country, if you look at Nigeria, how many million young people are out there? It's simply impractical to ask of any, even in Europe. I mean, I've been in Europe for more than 20 years. They cannot even achieve that. So the answer then becomes, how do we go back to the drawing board? How do we reconfigure the functionality of what higher education can actually deliver? So that it's not just bumps on seat. So that when students walk through that door, they know what they are getting. That at the end of the day, I tell you, Tosu, what I would like to see for all higher education institutions, not just in Nigeria, but Africa, and they can set that model, that there's a minimum basic skills that anyone that has gone through higher education institution must acquire, must have. Skills to really potentially be able to create jobs. It cannot be that we have, say for instance, informal sector where a lot of young people, a lot of people are really innovating, inventing things that are unheard of. So there has to be that. And that is keyed into some sort of what I call a national framework that is recognizable by industry. And by the way, we cannot do this alone. Higher education cannot function in and of itself and be effective without industry. Meaning that the diet that they feed students has to have very strong industry resonance across the sectors, from agribusiness sector to financial sector to manufacturing sector to all of that. So the key into the curricula. So when the individual comes off, the individual is well-rounded to support those particular sectors. So there has to be a real continental, intercontinental, or even a regional or national conversation as to what kind of higher education do we want in Africa. At the moment, in my view, is very much imperialist. It's very much what the British and the French have actually left for us. But if you look decades back, French and British have already moved on. So we need to really redesign, and we have the potentials, we have the credentials to really redesign and reconfigure the kind of higher education that we really need in this continent, and also in Nigeria. And I cannot see why Nigeria cannot take lead in that, in a way that higher education pays for itself, pays for young people, because it's very expensive to really become a graduate of any sort, be it university, college of education, or even in technical education. It's very expensive. Very few people can afford that. But my view is that it should deliver. It should deliver at the point of, if you like, need of not just individual, but also a society.
All right, let's get the parting shot from Klaus. Klaus, what more do you have to say about the fourth Global Annual Meeting, the Forum of Innovation of in African Universities? What more can you tell us as we wrap up?
I think this forum was founded 4 years ago during COVID, and the first one was because of COVID only online. The second one was held in the UK as a hybrid version. So last year we finally, because it's a forum for innovation in African universities, this is African higher education sector. Last year was the first one we are hosted in Africa. We were here in Abuja, and it was a very, very good event. We were asked to hold or to host it the second time in Abuja. We are looking forward to very interesting discussions, enlarge the networks, deliver a platform for networking, and this time is the first time we have a mixture of across the whole higher education sector, from universities to colleges to polytechnics. It will also be very interesting because it's not just every sector has its right, but I think the combination of everything and also to join probably the sources of research and development. I think it's obvious if you go to sports or wherever, even in business, that a team is more effective and is able to deliver more than just a single player. So I would like to see networking and partnerships coming up between polytechnics and universities and colleges to bundle their resources. It can also help to reduce the costs of research and development, to interact with industry. I'm very, very curious and look forward to Wednesday what this year's event will bring here in Abuja.
May I add to that, if I may?
We have just 1 minute. 1 minute, and that's our time. 1 minute.
International partners coming. A lot of higher education institutions are coming, including the University of West of England, including Aberdeen universities, where you can form partnerships and they can actually grow from there together with local knowledge. Okay, because I urge everyone to really key into that. Yeah. Okay,
Professor Pascal Anosike, thank you so much, founder of Forum for Innovation of African Universities, and also Mr. Klaus Schneider, who's the co-founder of the Forum. Have a great event. I know, Prof, the timing, it can't be enough for you to talk about this, but that's our time. Thank you, and have a great day. I wish you guys all the best.